Welcome to the Horizon Room. We're talking about master schedule flexibility to attract and retain students. And this is actually a really great topic because I just came off some conversations with colleagues about time and space. And the conversation, of course, went to master schedule and some of the restrictions and things like that are built into master schedules that you might not even think about. You might not really be cognizant that these are things that are happening, and that in fact this is impacting your ability to shift and change. So I know that we've got a few people on the line, and as usual, this is a conversation. So for sure, type up, raise a hand, jump in with questions and comments, because we definitely want to hear all of your ideas and see if we can't collaborate. So again, the Horizon Room, if you haven't been here before, it's a space for educators, and we're getting together, talking about stuff, talking about hot topics, solving some problems, sharing some learning, sharing some solutions. With me today, I've got Leilani Coffin. She's the CEO of the Learning Council. We partner all the time on this stuff, and as you may know, we're on national tours talking to educators just like you, bringing data, bringing new research forward, sharing what's working for others. And if you haven't already been out there to one of our events, for sure go. It's just such a good, it's a good collaboration space. And I know that it might sound self-serving for me to say that, but when I was on the other side of this as an educator, it's always valuable for me. So for sure, check that out, because we're going to be coming to a city near you. So I want to flash forward with today's topic a little bit, and then I want to flash back as well. So this is a concept that I've been wrestling around with. And it goes something like this, right? And we all know this. We know that 100 years ago plus, an industrial model of education was built, and we started a transformation from what school used to be to this new industrial model of school. And it was new, and it was innovative, and it was built to prepare students for success in a workplace that was dictated by some societal needs, right? So the economy was moving in a certain direction. Factories were coming online. There were new technologies being developed, and those new technologies were developed to help humans be more effective, right? To help humanity, like the steam engine, right? There's a few of them listed here. Factory assembly lines, brand new, minds were being blown, right? The telegraph typewriters, I can use something like this and put words on a page. That's crazy. Photographs, all of that new technology was being developed at the time that we were starting to put kids in different classes for different subjects, and we were starting to group them by age, right? We were starting to move them out of a single room school into these rows, and bells would ring, and it was very much like whistles blowing in the factory, right? And what was happening is that we were shifting. We were taking educators and students from what they knew before this into something that was a brand new model. And that was probably really uncomfortable for people. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm raising my hand. I'm like in class. Okay, Chris. So I was just remembering there's a picture I saw quite a while ago. I wish I knew where it was, but it was a massive classroom like in New York City, and they had like 2 teachers, and there was like 500, maybe 1,000 kids in the picture. And I remember the words were something like there was 1,000 kids to 2 teachers. And what they would do is they would meet the first thing in the morning. They would meet with all the older kids, and they would deputize the older kids to form up small groups of younger kids during the course of the day. And that was the model before this.
Totally.
Before the manufacturing model. It was just like
absolutely
very, very weak in terms of human resource. And
well, for sure.
So kids were just basically, they were giving their little booklets or whatever, and they mostly, what do they have, chalk and little tiny chalkboards back
They
then?
did, yeah. Or if you're like me back in the day, you're writing with coal from the fire on the backside of a shovel. That's not true. And so yeah, but absolutely. I mean, right, it was a shift. We were taking people out of what they were comfortable with in terms of an educational model and a structure, and we said, you know what, we're going to do something different, and we're going to do that different thing with these new technologies, and we're going to do it for these reasons, and we're going to prepare our kids in this new model for success in the workplace as the society is dictating, right? And so I want to flash forward to today a little bit, because now we're still operating in that old model predominantly, right? We're making some shifts forward. But what's interesting to me is that one of the things that we fail to recognize is the similarity between what happened when we went to an industrial model to where we are today, right? Because today the need is still the same. We're still needing to prepare students to meet societal needs, to succeed in the workplace, and to work with technologies of the day. Those things have changed, right? And so in a very similar fashion, we have to shift to a new model that reflects the needs today and in the future. So that the goal is still the same, right? We just are in a spot now where we have to change, and it's going to be uncomfortable, and it is. It's uncomfortable for people.
Yeah, it's going to be really uncomfortable. What I want to say something about what you're saying, and that is, yeah, the goal is to prepare students for the future, but it's a different future. So
Absolutely.
when they were doing the industrial age model, what employers wanted was for people to shut up and do the work. They wanted them to all be the same. So the model was built to normalize you, to make you the same and not a loudmouth. And because you were not destined to be management material, usually you were going to work the line. So what was built was something that was going to create that outcome. And it still does. And we're still trying to butter over the problem of equity over the top of a model that is churning away at industrial age speed to create everybody the same, right? Based on your age, you're supposed to be in this. What do you mean you're behind? What do you mean you're ahead? Too bad.
And it's not even tenable, right?
It's not even tenable. And today, what do we want? We actually, as employers, want the exact opposite that. We don't want you to show up and ask 1,000 questions because you don't know what to do and you're not on a manufacturing line. You're supposed to sit there and think and process and basically, be like a mini manager of some function, right? Because the machines are doing everything else. There's automation even of manufacturing lines, right? So that all went away, and we want a different type of people now. And we're manufacturing something else. So, I think I just wanted to make that point because it is a significant shift, but it's not, we're not going for the same thing anymore.
We're definitely not going for the same thing, but and the thing that I find fascinating is that we lose sight of the fact that we've done this before. We've made a shift before, and we made a shift toward a new future for kids, right? And we kind of didn't know what that was going to look like, right? In a very similar way, we've got machines that are automating functions right now. There's a whole list of jobs that have disappeared because automation is taking over those things. It's causing a redefinition of the humanity or your role in whatever it is that you do. But what I sometimes butt up against, and what I struggle with a little bit, is that sometimes people look at this change and fail to realize that we are continuously evolving. And that in order for us to actually make this shift, it's happening. We've seen it on the road. We've seen it on our tour, and where the change is actually happening to people. It's happening to them. And so that's great for me to see, because then I know some stuff's happening, right? We're rounding the bend.
When they say that, what are they saying is happening to them?
What are they saying? Well, actually, it's that we're recognizing that the change is happening. So what's happening is that through evidence of change and shift, the change and the transformation is actually happening to them, even though they may not be doing so in an explicit manner. So, for example, the fact that teachers aren't available to fill classrooms is evidence, right? The fact that we still have student attrition, that's evidence, right? So that's evidence that a change is afoot, and you then are either watching it happen to your system, or you're actively engaged in joining the change. And that's where the excitement is.
Yeah, and I think that I've also heard people say, oh, you mean we're going to use spaces differently and we're going to use time differently? Well, we're sort of being pushed to do that right now. Like, we just bought all new furniture that has wheels on it, like, oh, that's good. That's been around for 20 years. That's fantastic, though. But how are you using time differently? And that's where people bungle. I think the time part is literally the hardest part. I could tell you stories about what we've actually gone through in terms of analysis of the time problem.
Right. And I think that's true. I think it's definitely something that is hard. It's not tangible, right? So it's hard for people to conceive of how to shift time. It's almost like you're talking alien talk. It's like we're talking about a future movie, and we're talking about a time machine. And so this is really those things, right? So we're talking about all those pressures, and those pressures there are evidence that a change is necessary, and in some instances that change is happening to people, and that's scary to me, because that means they're not taking control, which then means that they're going to be heading down a path that actually is going to lead to their ultimate potential disillusion, right? I mean, ultimately they may become irrelevant, and we see some of that happening where kids have left in sufficient numbers that schools are closing, and that's evidence. That's a flag for that. So the reason that we actually came up with this topic, and that this topic came up, was because we had folks saying, hey, yes, time and space. We heard that on the road. We heard time and space used differently. We have people that are working very directly with us who are heading down an initiative, a pathway to shift time in their system. And they engaged with us and said, hey, how can we do this? How can we actually make this a reality and make this happen? And a lot of it comes down to master schedule and some of the sort of the antiquated structures and things that constructs that we've been sort of built around. So one of those is the master schedule, and we all know that time is probably the most valuable resource that we have, or at least the variable, right? And so we all operate within a construct of time, and the scheduling of that, historically at least, has been largely a sorting mechanism, and it's a way to move students or humans from one spot to another in an orderly fashion. It follows that old industrial model where science is taught in one room, and then you move to language arts, and then you move to math and whatever in science, and you do that in isolation, right? And it's a single classroom, single content, single teacher type of a model. And as you do that, as you create those schedules, they tend to stay rigid because they're blocked, and people don't generally mess with those, right? So you generally don't see that someone is going to take data from or input from what students are doing, what the results or the outcomes are for students, what the input from the teachers is, what the need for that particular demographic or that community of students is, and then fix the schedule to maximize that. You very seldom see that, right? And so ultimately, though, the master schedule is this.
Can I just comment on that really quick?
For sure. Yeah.
So I think what happens with master schedules, because we had to study them a lot in Learning Council, is that for you as an individual, time is linear. It's sequential. 1 minute follows the next minute. So your personal experience is very linear. Schools try to do parallel scheduling. Okay, so it's very non-sophisticated. It's the sequentialness of the day and the linearness of the paths. Okay, and you can sort of jump from this path to the next path, but it's still sort of paralleling all the time. And I think what's happening now is that we're going to invite everyone who's listening to us today to think of time as an exponential. So that's not linear, it's not parallel, it's something else entirely, it's exponential. And exponential time use means a range of flexibility of time that completely blows up the whole group block schedule. And that's completely scary to people in education, because they can't think with anything but the classroom and the teacher as the centricity of their model. They don't see time as a model. They don't see exponential use of time and experience as a model. But I think that's what you're getting to, right?
Oh, for sure. Yes. Yeah. I mean, definitely. And it's not even, I guess it's not even thought of as a tool or a lever. It's thought of as something that you have to manage, but it's not thought of as something that's an opportunity for you, because it actually is. You can use time in a way to create conditions for learning that empower, that build student agency, that can help to personalize experience, that can broaden experiences for learners. They can begin to increase efficiencies for the adults and the teachers and the administrators. All of those things are relative to time, and time is just a volume knob, right? We get to use that And so what I would love to for folks that are listening to come away from this with is some energy around using time versus being beholden to it. And that's a mindset shift, because we all have time. We all have finite amount of number of hours in the day when our eyelids are open, and how we choose to use that time means that we're more or less effective in the things that matter most to us. And we don't get to make more time. We just get to do something different with it. And we can use it. We can use it as a tool for sure. And in schools, absolutely we should be. And this is one of the very first things that I ask colleagues to think about. How are you using time? And how have you separated yourself from being subservient to it, in how you're creating things? So that's a great point. I think it's, I think we're going to get to that spot. And today what we have is, and what I want to share is some thinking around some strategies that could be used, and some things to think about in terms of shifting your master's schedule that can help you to do that. And I wanted to use some of the time today to not only hear from folks and process this together, because we have been doing a lot of work with educators as the Learning Council around this very same thing. All of our work around hybrid logistics is really talking about time and space. It just is. And so a logistics platform. Yeah.
I'll say a couple other things about sort of what we've gone through, because, we built the hybrid logistics platform in No Story. A couple things we found out that were really critical to the future and how people should think about time is that a student does need a schedule, right? You don't just dump a bunch of stuff on them and go, we'll have a meeting about this one of these days. Like, there's no way to help a student run themselves unless they're given a basic schedule, which can be flexible. So, for example, study math in this first hour, study language in the second hour, social study in the third hour, take your breaks or whatever. So that's what the small schools do, right? The ones that have very few teachers and they're teaching many, many grades. They put people on schedules of study, right? And then they intersect with them. They're not lecturing, they're not running classrooms like the big schools, but they're scheduling kids. And not everybody studies the same thing at the same time, right? Because some kids, their math brain doesn't wake up until the third hour of the day. And so the teacher realizes early on, I'm not going to put you on math until 11 o'clock, right? So there's one thing. So the best way that we found to manage time where you can both accommodate that traditionalness, like where people have block schedules, and also the wild flexibility that I just described, is to be course centric, lesson sequence centric, which is very, of course, you're nodding your head, right? Of course, that's true, right? Because when you do it that way, then you can disaggregate time in class from study time, where you're ingesting the materials, the ingestion part, which might be interactive on screen, right? For the younger kids. And
yep.
It might not be. It might be a guy got a stupid PDF, it's like, I got to read that. I'm going to watch this dull video. There's no buttons for me to poke, right? So that's what I call just ingestion. And you never want too much of that, okay? And then there's this middle ground of active screen time where you're still on the screen, but you're doing things, right? You're creating things. It's like engaging and poking buttons, and animations are playing and stars are shooting out. It's awesome. You got the right answer. You get to go to the next level. And then there's actual in-person activity, even if it's on a screen, or if it's in a classroom and it's hands-on, that's active. But there's also active screen learning, which is different than passive. So what I'm getting around to saying is that study time disaggregated from the time of togetherness was the first epiphany had by Learning Council with all of our advisors from schools and districts across the nation when the pandemic hit. Of course it was, right? Because everybody was home, right? We couldn't go anywhere.
Right.
And study time was necessarily remote. So you had to direct it remotely as a teacher. So suddenly there was epiphanies, like I said, of, hey, do we need to be on a web conference call all day, every day, as if we were still in the classroom? We don't. Go study this stuff, and then we're going to have 20 minutes together. Or the next time we're going to get together, it's going to be an hour because we're all going to do a practice and a discussion, okay? But maybe mostly it's only 15 minutes every time we get together. So suddenly togetherness time got really different than it is in the traditional schedule. So I'm going to stop there because I could go into what are the parts of a master schedule now versus the old parts.
Right.
But I'll stop there
Right.
and have you comment.
Well, I think that's interesting because when you start to consider that the use of those blocks can be flexible. I remember looking at recently I looked at a school's master schedule that actually they used what they called advisory, right? And so it was a large block of time, and we kind of described this in some of the materials that we use when we talk to folks. But it was the common homeroom. It was the common. It was titled
Study
advisory,
hall.
but it was a study hall. It was a collaborative time. It was a collective time, and what was powerful in this particular system is that was used as a lever for not only getting work and organizing, but it was also a community time. So it was a time that they were using to build community, act as a cohort, act as a team, all of the things that you think you would lose by breaking up this structure, you actually gain in creating these larger blocks of time. And I think that's interesting. And I think that shows me that this particular system had broken apart the activity of learning, right, and of teaching. They had thought a little bit differently about the role of the teacher. They had thought differently about where students actually do need to be and where. It also sort of indicated to me that they were thinking differently about some of the restrictions that we perceive in terms of things like seat time, right? And so they're still meeting whatever the letter of the law is for seat time in their state. But guess what? You're not going the bell doesn't ring every 50 minutes, causing you to jump up and go to a different job, which is essentially what we're doing. And that kind of flexibility takes some courage, because you've got to undo this sort of time-honored master schedule concept and think differently. And that's where you start to see outcomes change, and you start to see people engage a little bit differently. So one of the things that I wanted to share today, and there's a finite number. Ultimately, you know how to find me, and folks after calls either send me a text or they shoot me an email and say, "Hey, remember that one thing? Can we talk about that a little bit further?" Absolutely. And this is just sort of skimming over the top of some strategies that you can try, things that you might want to consider in terms of shifting the master schedule and thinking differently about it. So cross-curricular experiences, we know, are powerful, right? They do a couple of different things. They increase engagement. They cause higher order thinking, because we're now making natural connections between ideas and content areas. They're creative of teamwork, right? So if you have an interdisciplinary or cross-curricular connection, you've got a science teacher working with an ELA teacher. You've got a math and science. You've got a math and ELA. You've got a combination of things. What that does, however, is that it starts to maximize some efficiencies. And so if you do that, you can also start to use and think of time differently. And so that means that instead of having a 50-minute section for ELA and then a 50-minute section for science or humanities, what if you combine that into a block that hit both of those content areas, was highly engaging, did all the things that we know are effective for deeper learning, and you did so in such a way that it maximized other time downstream or upstream from that one block. That's a shift, right? And that's not something that you just sort of flip the switch on and go, "Hey, cool, you know what, you guys, you're going to now pair, and you guys are going to pair," right? You want to bring in voice and choice from the learners. You want to do all of those things that are going to build that flexible and personalized experience, and then start reflecting that, because those are values, right? Those should be reflected in your strategic plan. They should be reflected in your belief statements for your district, and all of those things can be supported and moved through the master schedule. So any of these changes that you think of that are project based, they might be, they might have deep inquiry within them. All of those things are examples of ways that you can shift your master schedule, increase effectiveness of teaching and learning, and move on. And that's an evolutionary step. Then this is something, it's interesting that we're talking about this now because I mentioned our tour of events, and we actually are creating a much broader sequence of learning topics and themes, and cross-curricular learning and structures is one of those topics. And to me personally, this is fascinating because this was me in the classroom, and this was me as a principal and as a district administrator. I was all for, if people said, how about if we merged these two courses together? I said, do it, let's go, see what it looks like. So any thoughts on that? What are you thinking about? What are you thinking about?
Well, I was thinking about I was thinking about the road that we first went down, and we started talking about manipulating time so it could be more exponential and it could intersect kids more precisely with exact teaching skill. Like, what do you need? Well, these 3 kids need this right now, right? These 4 kids need this right now. And it ended up being, that's the foundation of hybrid logistics. So everything you've been talking about is logistical, right? Like merging 2 subjects to come out with one activity of learning is definitely going to be a time saver. It's also highly sophisticated logistics on the order of magnitude of getting a FedEx box from Hoboken, New Jersey to anywhere in China in 24 hours. I mean, there's a lot of logistics to that baby, right? Like huge. Right. So I want to actually show you a screen, if I can share for a second. Do you have me marked for share?
I will stop sharing momentarily.
Okay. Yes, I want to share. This is actually one of the boards that is in use all over America for how master schedules get done. And it's really simple. You line up your teachers with the tracks of time, your Carnegie units or even shorter, across a day. See how those tracks are running across the day? And you assign your teacher, and here's your subjects. So then it's the student's job. This is the quote unquote choice, which is really, I think, poor choice in terms of what you really get. You can have social studies with the teacher you want in this hour, but if you take band in this hour, you can't have that, right? So that's choice. And they will talk about, in the master scheduling world, having to deal with onesies, right? Which is not something a baby wears. We always, it's having to deal with the student who's sort of hanging out there, who can't get their requirements met because they had to take band, which is only offered in the morning for a large block of time, something like that.
Right.
So the navigation of this, as you can see, is jump from this teacher on that track to a different teacher on a different track to fill up your time slots. But it's very basic. Time is already allocated. It's not held in reserve for use at prime things, right? It's allocated. So you are going to go from, like you said, job to job during the course of your day. And they're going to be disconnected jobs. And at the end of the day, your brain will be scrambled. If you don't, like an egg.
It's true. It's true.
That's what the industrial age built. So I just wanted you to see that. I'll stop sharing.
So leave that up there for, well, that's okay.
Okay.
So that's fine. We can move on.
Okay.
So what I find that's interesting is that what we're actually proposing, and the school systems that have actually been successful at re-engineering their master schedule, is that instead of aligning teachers first and building the schedule around the teacher, they flip that upside down and they put in the students first.
Yes.
And then they align the teachers. And that's a very different way of thinking about this use of time. And it is a little bit of a mind blower. It just is, right? Because you think, oh my gosh, I've got 3,500 kids in my building. That sounds like a jailbreak. I don't even know how to think about that. But if you start putting this together and you start going side by side, elbow to elbow with people that have some other experience, it can be done. It's not impossible. It just isn't impossible because people are doing it, right? We know this because people are doing it. And so that's the difference. That's the main difference, is that we're starting with kids versus starting with teachers. And if you start with kids, you're going to build a student-centered system. Then what that actually looks like in real life is this whole board goes away. You just wipe out this board. Okay. So that's gone. Yep.
And you say, I'm going to put everybody on a study schedule that could be individualized all the way down to the kid who can't do math until at least 11 o'clock in the morning. Okay. Is what I'm talking about.
Right.
And in so doing, they're going to all be in study hall or homeroom or the quad or whatever you want to call it at your place.
Right.
And you might need to have 16 of those in your building, but they're always in there and somebody's running them. Could be a teacher.
Yep.
Could be a homeroom leader that's a paraprofessional, but the teachers are now roaming.
Right.
Okay. So if Henry's on math at hour 11, but a good proportion of the rest of the homerooms are at hour 9, that math teacher is really busy running around homerooms fixing that. But the classrooms are now used as meeting space. So what's really interesting to me is when this concept came up is that I remember working in corporate America for big media and big advertising for a long time, right? And as well as a big security company out of Canada. I did a tour of duty for them too. The big corporations for the last 30 years have had these big buildings where everybody had cubicles, about cubicles, cubicle farms of people.
Yes,
and then the
I've
big
been there.
important people had offices around the perimeter. Well, they all were built with meeting space and you had to reserve your meeting space, right? Otherwise somebody comes getting in there and like, get out, I already had this reserved, right?
Yep.
What I'm talking about is you still have a class. You still get to teach in the traditional way, however much you want, based on what was built for that course. Okay. But the student is going to study the materials you gave them in your classroom no more. They're going to be over here with somebody else over their shoulder, unless it's apparent to the person leading that homeroom at the time, that kid's like lost. Get the teacher in here. Right? They need a meeting now because they're already falling asleep. So it's a disaggregation of whole group is what I'm saying. Just like corporate America disaggregated whole group long ago, they were no longer manufacturing plants. It's not everybody on the manufacturing floor at the same time. So now it was like people doing individual duties on their own, but overseen by management. And then when needed, they were coming together. Right. Now, some of those moments are long come together, right? It's like an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Depends on what's needed. Doesn't matter. But that could all be triggered algorithmically based on a student's pace. So if 3 students hit the same thing at the same time, boom, meeting triggered, calendar, teachers alerted, they fly in there, right? Right. And they get the right classroom reserved. That's completely different than what I just told you. But what ends up happening is you're not in a manufacturing plant anymore. Voila, you're being prepped for real life.
Yeah, totally. And that's again, we're talking about mind-blowing moments. That's one of those. And we've watched people struggle with that. We have. But we've also seen
educators have never worked for a major corporation. They have no idea that picture that I just told you. They haven't lived that reality like I would say 7/8 of the rest of America has.
Well, what I find also interesting is that as professionals, teachers don't have a lot of time to collaborate. So that collaborative time is very clearly identified and it's scheduled. And at a certain time, they go and collaborate. They go work together. And so the calendar thing happens and they go do that, or they meet with other professionals from another building or whatever in a professional sense. They go do that and they actually model that and they like that. But then when you say that's what it should look like for the kids, then you're like, oh, no. I mean, that's great for adults and professionals, but we can't have kids doing that. That's bananas.
They can't just run around on the loose.
Why would we ever do that? Why would we ever cause purposeful meeting times and the highest best use of time guiding us, right? Why would we ever do that? Seriously? Yeah.
So, but the best colleges now, the most innovative meeting centers, they've got whiteboard walls everywhere, even in the hallways. They have interactive whiteboards in the hallways. Kids are just running, students are running around. They're like, hey, were you just in that? Oh, I want to work something out with you. And then they just start writing on the wall and they work out the problems right there together, right? Without the teacher anywhere near them, professor or whoever, right?
And so if you think about all of the newest schools, any of the new thinking in terms of architecture and designing schools, all have vertical writing spaces. And they have vertical writing spaces not because it's cool to write on walls, but because there's research that connects working out thinking on a vertical workspace, and brain activity and retention. And so now if you look at school design, it has all those things. There's meeting rooms in the middle of a pod, there's glass windows, you can have line of sight supervision. In that room, there's a common table, there's plugins for your device, there's a whiteboard, and there may be a smart board or a monitor, and those are collab spaces, and kids use them, and that's fantastic. We need more of that. We need some more. If you're out there listening and designing buildings, if you passed a bond or a levy to build more buildings, call us, because we need to get you hooked up with some architects that know how to build buildings, for sure, definitely. So here's another one. This is another construct and another thing, and we kind of talked about it a minute ago, but building collaborative time into the schedule. I was working with a school system, talking to teachers. They were sort of painting their picture of a vision for the future of the school district, and some of the conversations was, you know what, we don't have time to collaborate, and if we're going to go do this big thing and this shift, we need time, and we don't have time. And that's, to me, that's a flag. The teachers are asking for time to do the collaboration and to think as professionals and problem solve as professionals, so that they can start meeting the needs much more accurately of the kids as they meet them. You can build that into a master schedule. You can build that into your schedule, and there are ways that people do it.
It's also part of the reason you have this problem is because of the problem you're in, right? So it's like everybody's in a walled off classroom because they're all watching over students, and some of them, quite frankly, are on Facebook while the kids are doing the reading.
Right.
But they have to stay in there because you didn't rework the way you use space and the way you use your human teachers, who's watching over them while they're doing the reading. Okay. So they can't get away to collaborate because they're stuck in the classroom.
Right.
But
and
I've
why
heard
is that?
one superintendent, I think it was Andrew, right, from Kamal.
Yep.
Who said he's made it so the teachers are not always in the classroom when they're not in the classroom. Okay. Because some of them are not, they're not like the younger kid classrooms are going to be in there all day. They have a bullpen rather than separate offices. So they can collaborate on the fly all the time. It's like all the police shows you've ever watched. They're all in a big bullpen, right?
Right.
Or the financial movies, right? Where everybody's like doing their thing. Of course, collaboration is a problem when you have to intentionally do it. Right. Because you're locked by time. I hope that as you talk to more people about this, that if they feel like, well, we need to be able to collaborate. Well, the reason you can't collaborate is because of the way you're structured. Right? Because you're incarcerated in your room all day. Sure. When you know, and I know that you don't really need to be in there all day. Somebody else could be in there for part of that time. Right.
Totally. Absolutely. And how many classrooms have we seen where you've got a handful of kids, or maybe it's 30, or maybe it's whatever the number is. And in the successful classrooms, the teacher is maximizing their time, and they're doing all of these things, and they're rotating between groups, and they're calling it's a magical thing. But every now and then you walk into a room and the teacher is sitting in the bunker, and maybe they are checking Facebook. I don't know what they're doing, but they're not interacting with kids.
You know, the reason I mentioned, I think it was Virginia Beach Public Schools that actually admitted at an event one year that once everybody had devices, that one of the things they noticed was that there was when their network technician took a look at it, there was this huge surge certain times of the day in middle of classroom periods when Facebook was being accessed. So they had to like block Facebook across the networks. But when they investigated, it wasn't the kids.
Yeah.
So they admitted that.
Fascinating.
And I know we love teachers, but that
I do.
Yeah.
I do. And I still am one. And it's just that we have to think differently. And there are those rock stars, and I love them. And they are willing to jump out and do things differently. And we need some more of those people, because those are my folks. So if you're thinking about other ways that you can not help shift your structure, right, through different use of time, but you could also then help your teachers to be much more effective and be more efficient by adding collaborative time into your schedule. It's not impossible, and it breaks things up. It's another thing that you can stick in there and wedge it in, and it creates all kinds of interesting positive disequilibrium, and good things come of that. Good things are going to come from that. Otherwise, if you don't have collaborative time built for your teachers, you're never going to move stuff. You just won't. And it just won't happen. So think about that. That's critical. This is kind of a big deal. And this is one where people go, oh, yeah, I don't think I can do that. Breaking down age and grade-based structures. And you've probably heard us talk about this, and we do, and we definitely poke at this a lot. But breaking down those structures and providing students with much more purposeful use of time and space, like we were just talking about, and then having a very purposeful intersection of a human for that thing, doesn't mean that they all have to be 6. It doesn't, because guess what? All those 6-year-olds don't have the same learning need, and they don't learn in the same way. And we all knew that, except somehow we're putting them into little rows and boxes, and that's not necessary. It just isn't, and neither is it highly effective, right? We've seen in high schools mixed age and grade groups being highly successful, and they already do that. Why couldn't we expand on that idea, right? Let's combine those last 2 slides, create collab time for those things to be planned, start creating and smurging cross-curricular experiences, and then let's break up the age and the grade-based structure that's holding other kids out of that. It's exclusive, right? This is the more I think about this, it's actually a disservice, and it kind of gets me a little upset because it's exclusive of kids instead of inclusive. And that's bananas.
And we've seen the results of some of that, right? So kids graduating, and then they go on to parenthood, and they have no idea what to do with younger kids because maybe they were a singleton, out of their family. So they just can't socialize with people of much younger age, and that's a shame. And it's also one of the reasons that during the pandemic we saw a lot of people, as we were coming back, say, I don't really want to go back. We experienced family for the first time. Before, we were all running here and there, and the 3rd grader had to go to that school, and the 6th grader to that school, and the one that's already in 12th grade, and the one in college, in different places, and the mom went to this job, and dad went to that job. We saw each other for like 20 exhausted minutes at the end of the day. Like people are so done with that. And they're also, they miss each other. Right. And that socialization, that sense of, I helped a younger kid, or that younger kid taught me something I never knew. Like, holy cow, that's a whole new dimension to the creation of a good, positive society. And I think it's beautiful. But I want to comment something else, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go for it.
The grade-based structure and the way that you build a master schedule is beyond the even imagination to do anything other than what's been being done for 100, I think it's over 100 years, Chris.
It is. It is.
So I'll break down kind of what we went through if you want to know about the future of master schedules. You have to create your master calendar. This is what everybody has to do: start date and end date of the year, right? And you got to pull out all your holidays and breaks, okay? And then you have to actually make sure that you create what's called a segment. Because if you remember, during the pandemic, New York was doing some crazy stuff. It's like AB weeks, AB days. Okay. So that meant a rotation in buildings. So that meant you had to roster into segments and rotate them. And so you were rotating weeks. And then you had to make determinations. This is what we had to build, and no story, algorithmically, about when the stop of the trade was, right? Week 1, week 2. Are we going to go back to week 1? Or are we going to have a completely new week 3, right? So that was all had to be built in. And then the trade of days in segments is called rotations. We made that up for rotations of days. And then below that, you have to create your blocks. Now, that is not because you're going to always use blocks, although you could, the way a traditional school does. But once you create the blocks, you have to set the time to them, okay? You can also create a totally separate set of blocks for different sets of time. But within that first set of blocks, right, you got all your time sequenced here. You're now going to have tracks, which is what that image was that I showed you. So a kid can go this time, and then in the next time, skip to this track.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next time skip back up to this track. Okay. Very complicated set of algorithms to do that, just so you know. But beyond that, no one ever built anything where you could actually push that schedule without forcing place on it. So the student can have the schedule of this is what I'm supposed to study, and it's just for me in time. And then over the top of that, intersect meetings instead of sending them to a classroom. That's never been done before.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that was never done before in terms of schedule is allow it to be both. You're in a block schedule, except for you're in this big window right here, which is a homeroom. And during homeroom time, we're going to intersect meeting spaces. So you're going to always be there unless a meeting pops on. And then you're going to go to this lab, or then you're going to go to that extracurricular activity. Nobody did that before either. So the innovations in time and space that were accelerated by the pandemic, they're really exciting because, and I just want to state this again, I don't think anybody's ever created it so that you can schedule to one. It's never been done before. And that's probably the most exciting thing, because I think personalization can be really real.
Sure.
For time and space.
Totally can. And I think it is, I would even venture to say that it, not that it can be real, I think it's going to be real. I mean, this is at the top of this hour, we talked about a shift that is afoot, and it is happening. We have to stop talking about personalization as if it's something that is sort of murky in the future, and we see it as sort of the golden utopia. It's as real as we are today. It's happening. We just have to now decide how we're going to go get it, and not if we are, but how we will, and that's critical. So I know that we're kind of running out of time, and I want to open it up again to folks that are listening. I know we've got quite a few folks out there. Feel free to hop in, but I also want to share my contact information again, because a good number of you have it already, and I've heard from you following these sessions. But I do want to throw that out, because we did just skip over a bunch of things that actually have some cascading elements underneath them that are fairly complex. I also have a list of examples of where these sorts of things are happening. So if you're listening and you're interested in talking about where to see these things and some examples of what's happening out there in the field that might help your own learning and inform your own development, then definitely reach out to me via email. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. You can find me through the Learning Council website. Those are all good ways to get a hold of me. And then I'll get back to you and we'll schedule a conversation, because ultimately the purpose of this is to help you folks out there in the field doing the hard work, thinking the deep thoughts and making a difference for kids to continue to evolve forward. And that's really the whole purpose of this whole thing. So any last thoughts, Lonnie, before we wrap up for the day?
No, I think that was great. I think it was a good conversation, Chris. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think it's great, and I think what I'm really excited about is that again, like I mentioned before, we're bringing this type of topic, and in fact, this very topic and some of the things that we talked about into our spring events, and we will have a list of cities that we're coming to. We're coming to a city near you for sure, and if not in the spring, in the fall, and we're going to be bringing these conversations and some digging in and some examples and some ability to personalize the experience for yourself and for your team. And it's going to be exciting, because I feel like this is yet again, as this year was, it's going to be a time for energizing and catalyzing change, because it always happens. And that's very exciting to me. So up next in the Horizon Room, folks, what is a K-12 process and tech model architecture? Yikes, big words, right? And so we're going to dig into that, right? But this is one of those foundational pieces. We're breaking this down for you, so that when you're thinking about making the shift that is necessary to personalize and flexible, you can think with some tools, and you can think with some experience that we're able to share only because we've worked with educators just like yourselves, and we didn't make it up. They're the ones doing it. We just get to share what the successes and learnings are. So November 30th, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Make sure that you register, and we'll see you in the next Horizon Room. Signing out. Have a great day.